Walk through the canned food aisle right now and you will see something most people completely miss. These 12 canned foods are sitting there quietly, fully stocked, clearly priced, with no one rushing to grab them. But by August 2026, their real value may have almost nothing to do with what the label says. Look a little closer and you will start noticing the early signs. Store brands are being restocked more slowly. Multi-packs are harder to find. Larger cans are quietly being swapped for smaller ones, while the price edges up by a few cents each time. Heat waves, power outages, storms, and tighter household budgets are all converging this August. When refrigeration becomes unreliable and fresh food becomes expensive, shelf-stable food stops being a backup plan and starts being the plan. This is not about fear. It is about being practical with food your family already eats. And the first item on this list needs almost no effort at all. Just open the lid. Most people only think about this next food once a year, and that is exactly why they are leaving one of the most useful pantry items on the shelf. 12. Canned pumpkin. For 11 months out of the year, canned pumpkin sits on the shelf almost completely ignored. Shoppers walk right past it because their minds go straight to Thanksgiving, to pie, to cinnamon and whipped cream. But canned pumpkin is not a holiday ingredient. It is one of the cheapest, most flexible tools a pantry can hold. Think about a day near the end of the week when the kitchen is almost empty. There is a little oatmeal left, a pot of soup that turned out thinner than expected, and a few baking ingredients sitting in the back of the cabinet. One can of pumpkin will not single-handedly solve dinner, but it can quietly improve 3 different meals. Stir a few spoonfuls into morning oatmeal and it becomes thicker and slightly sweet without any added sugar. Add some to a thin vegetable or bean soup and the broth gets body and depth without needing cream. Mix the rest into pancake or muffin batter and it keeps everything moist without making the recipe taste like dessert. A small amount added to chili thickens the sauce and softens the overall flavor without announcing itself at all. Beyond texture and thickness, pumpkin brings fiber and vitamin A into a pantry that leans heavily on rice, pasta, and canned meat. It fills in what those staples usually leave out: color, softness, and a source of fiber that is easy to use without changing the whole meal. That matters especially for older adults or anyone who finds dry, dense food harder to eat after a few days. And August makes this even more relevant than most people expect. Running an oven for an hour to roast a fresh pumpkin in summer heat is not something most households want to do. Canned pumpkin skips all of that. It also matters that August sits just before fall baking season begins. Store brands and familiar sizes may not be reliably restocked once shelves shift towards seasonal sections. Farming, processing, canning, and shipping costs all factor into what ends up on the label. For a product that peaks in demand only part of the year, lower margin options are often the first to go inconsistent. One thing to check before buying: make sure the label says 100% pure pumpkin or pumpkin puree. Canned pumpkin pie filling already has sugar and spices blended in and will not behave the same way in soups or savory dishes. Once opened, move the leftovers into a sealed container and refrigerate them. One can stretches across several meals rather than disappearing into a single large recipe. Do not let the mental image of pie keep you from stocking something that works as a vegetable, a thickener, and a baking ingredient all at once. Here's a question worth sitting with. If your refrigerator stopped working tonight, which source of milk in your kitchen would still be safe to use in the morning? 11. Evaporated milk. The coffee is still there, the oatmeal is still waiting, everything needed for a basic breakfast is in the pantry, but the carton of milk in the refrigerator has been sitting at room temperature since the power went out, and now no one is sure whether it is still safe. That is exactly the moment when a can of evaporated milk becomes something entirely different. It goes from forgotten baking ingredient to the only reliable dairy option in the house. Evaporated milk is simply milk with a portion of its water removed, then sealed into a can. While the can stays closed, it does not need refrigeration. That makes it genuinely useful for anyone who does not shop frequently, lives alone, or consistently finds that fresh milk goes bad before the carton is finished. The one critical limit is this: once the can is open, that advantage disappears. Opened evaporated milk must be refrigerated immediately and treated like any other perishable.
A can of mixed vegetables has already completed almost every one of those steps. Inside the can, there are typically carrots, peas, corn, green beans, and sometimes potatoes. They're already cleaned, cut, and heat processed. They only need to be warmed through or added directly to a dish already cooking. No cutting board, no knife, no pile of peels and scraps to clean up afterward. Picture someone coming home after a long and exhausting day. Their hands are sore, their back is tight. Standing at the sink for 15 minutes to prepare vegetables is no longer a small task. It becomes the reason vegetables get skipped entirely. In that situation, a can of mixed vegetables is not a gourmet solution. It is simply the path that still gets vegetables into the meal when every other option has become too much effort. One can works well added to soup, stirred into fried rice, folded into a stew, or used as a filling for pot pie. Because the vegetables are already cooked, they go in near the end and just need to warm through rather than cook down further. They also help stretch a small amount of protein. A modest portion of meat or fish combined with vegetables, starch, and sauce makes a larger, more filling dish without requiring more protein. For older adults, people managing arthritis, or anyone with limited hand strength or mobility, the work already done inside that can is not just about saving time. It is about being able to continue preparing meals that include vegetables at all. By August, the USDA projects fresh vegetable prices in the United States will have risen by roughly 6 to 8% in 2026. Canned mixed vegetables cannot replicate the texture of fresh ones, but they allow families to keep a variety of vegetables on hand without worrying about refrigerator space, ripening timelines, or prep energy. Check the sodium content before buying. Low sodium, reduced sodium, or no salt added versions are better choices for households watching salt intake. When water is available, a quick drain and rinse reduces sodium further. When water is limited, buying the lower sodium version from the start is more practical. After opening, store leftovers in a sealed container and refrigerate. In situations without refrigeration, choose a can small enough to finish in one sitting. On the shelf, watch for the small signals. Store brands restocked less often, fewer large family size options, unit prices rising as smaller cans replace bigger ones. Fresh vegetables have the advantage in texture and variety, but only when time, water, energy, and refrigerator space all cooperate. The real value of mixed vegetables is not only what is inside the can, it is everything you no longer have to do to get them onto the plate. The next item fills a gap that most people do not even realize exists in their food supply until it is too late to fix. 8. Full-fat coconut milk. Look at a typical food storage setup. Lots of rice, plenty of pasta, a solid supply of beans. Now ask a question that rarely comes up. How much fat does any of that actually contain? A pantry can hold enough calories to last for weeks and still produce meals that feel thin, dry, and unsatisfying. People eat a full serving and then find themselves looking through the cabinets 20 minutes later. Fat is not the only factor in satiety. Protein and fiber and total food volume all matter too. But fat is what helps flavors linger, what gives a dish a fuller texture, and what makes a simple bowl of rice feel like an actual meal rather than just fuel. That is the role full-fat coconut milk fills. Used to cook rice, it makes every grain fragrant and slightly rich. Added to a curry or a pot of lentils, the fat distributes evenly through the sauce, softening the spices and making ordinary beans and vegetables feel more substantial. It works as the base for noodle dishes or transforms into rice pudding with very little additional effort. The key is that one can does not belong to one person in one sitting. Because the fat spreads through the entire dish, a moderate amount improves a full pot and serves several people. If the goal is calories and richness, the label needs to say full-fat coconut milk. Light versions and carton-style coconut beverages are significantly thinner and do not perform the same function in cooking. Full-fat coconut milk is also high in saturated fat, so the value comes from using a reasonable amount to improve a whole meal, not from consuming the entire can at once. By August, the supply picture for coconut milk looks different from most domestic crops. The majority of supply comes from tropical growing regions and moves through international shipping networks. When a corn harvest fails, farmers can replant the following season. A new coconut tree takes years before it reaches stable production. That means weather disruptions, aging trees, or rising demand in producing countries cannot be corrected quickly.
It does not guarantee coconut milk will be difficult to find, but it does explain why supply responds more slowly than most seasonal crops. Instead of waiting for shelves to go empty, watch whether affordable full-fat versions are being consistently restocked and whether the price gap between budget and premium options is quietly growing. Refrigerate after opening and plan to use the full can before doing so. A large can only saves money when there is a plan to finish it. Coconut milk does not just improve the taste of a meal. It fills in the one thing that makes a meal feel truly complete when everything else in the pantry is dry, dense, and starchy. Pull tomatoes out of any pantry and watch how quickly every other ingredient becomes harder to turn into dinner. 7. Canned tomatoes. Remove tomatoes for a week and pasta loses its sauce.
Chili loses its structure. Vegetables and broth lose their fastest path to becoming something that actually tastes like a complete meal. The ingredients are still there, but the thing that holds them together is gone. That is what canned tomatoes actually do in a kitchen. They provide moisture, acidity, color, and the connective tissue that links separate ingredients into a real dish. They turn dry pasta into pasta with sauce. They turn beans and spices into chili. They help a handful of vegetables, a little broth, and whatever protein is left become something worth sitting down to eat. Tomato paste pushes that even further. Even a tablespoon makes a dish taste like it has been cooking for hours. Each form of canned tomato serves a different purpose. Whole peeled tomatoes are flexible and can be left as is, roughly chopped or crushed by hand. Diced tomatoes hold their texture and work well when a dish needs distinct pieces. Crushed tomatoes create a quick sauce base with very little effort. Tomato paste delivers concentrated flavor in a small amount. Rather than stocking too much of one type, mixing several varieties makes a pantry more adaptable and opens up more recipes. According to USDA data, fresh tomato prices in the United States were nearly 20% higher in June 2026 than they were during the same month the previous year. Canned tomatoes do not necessarily track fresh tomato prices exactly, but a key foundational ingredient moving under that kind of pressure does not leave canned versions untouched for long. A large share of the country's processing tomato supply comes from California. Drought, irrigation constraints, labor costs, and processing expenses in that single growing region can ripple outward across many products simultaneously. As August 2026 approaches, the signal to watch for is not the entire tomato section going empty. It is the early movement. Store-brand crushed tomatoes being restocked less reliably, low-cost tomato paste becoming harder to find, no salt-added options disappearing before the others. Those are the affordable versions that stretch a pantry the furthest. Taking tomatoes out of the kitchen does not just remove one can from a shelf. It makes dozens of other ingredients harder to transform into anything worth eating. When millions of families quietly make the same small budget decision at the same time, what happens to demand for one particular pantry staple? 6. Canned beans. It starts with one simple calculation. A family looks at the grocery receipt and decides to replace one meat-based dinner with something cheaper this week. No announcement, no emergency, just a quiet budget adjustment. Then the following week, it happens again, and then again. When millions of households make that same small decision simultaneously, the shift in demand is not small at all. That is what makes canned beans worth paying attention to. They sit at the crossroads of low cost, solid nutrition, and real convenience. Beans provide plant-based protein, fiber, iron, and complex carbohydrates. They add substance to a meal, help people stay full longer, and reduce how much of an increasingly expensive protein like meat is actually needed. Unlike dried beans, which require overnight soaking and hours on the stove, canned beans are ready to use immediately. Open the can, drain, and add them to whatever is already cooking. That convenience means habits can shift right away without learning a new cooking process from scratch. Black beans work in tacos, kidney beans belong in chili, chickpeas become hummus, salad, or curry with minimal effort. Cannellini beans fit naturally into Italian-style dishes. Pinto beans pair easily with rice and simple seasoning. That variety matters more than most people realize. Relying on one kind of bean means the flavors go repetitive within a week. Rotating between 5 or 6 different varieties keeps the same budget producing genuinely different meals. On the shelf, store-brand options and multi-packs attract exactly the families already trying to stretch their grocery money.
As meat prices continue to put pressure on household budgets, those same products will draw more demand from more shoppers at the same time. Beans do not have to disappear from shelves to become more valuable. As long as fresh meat continues moving beyond what many budgets can comfortably handle, the role of canned beans has already changed. The can looks the same, the price is still modest, but the practical value sitting inside it has quietly grown. There is a kind of protein in the pantry that requires no thawing, no seasoning, no pan, and no cleanup, and most households already own at least one can of it. 5. Canned tuna. Frozen meat needs to thaw. Raw meat needs seasoning, heat, a pan, and a sink full of dishes afterward. Canned tuna needs a can opener. That single difference is why it holds a place in the pantry that almost nothing else can replace. When protein is needed immediately, tuna is already ready. Open the can, drain it, add a little mayonnaise, mustard, or basic seasoning, and within a few minutes it becomes a sandwich filling, a protein for a quick salad, or a fast lunch for one person. For a slightly more substantial meal, tuna folds into pasta, rice, a green bowl, or a simple casserole. A small can creates the right portion without producing leftovers from a large piece of meat that then has to be stored and used before it goes bad. Familiarity is one of its most underrated qualities. Tuna does not need to convince anyone. Most shoppers already know how it tastes, know which dishes work with it, and know how to prepare it without thinking. On a day when energy and patience are already low, removing one more decision from the process matters. Tuna packed in water has a milder flavor and gives more control over fat content. Tuna packed in oil has a richer texture and tends to feel more filling. The right choice depends on the dish and on what the family prefers. As long as the can stays sealed and intact, tuna stores well according to package directions. It should still be rotated with other protein sources like eggs, beans, canned chicken, or salmon rather than becoming the only protein in the pantry. Tuna is not the most surprising item on this list, but a pantry that runs out of it loses one of the shortest and most reliable paths from an unopened can to a complete protein-rich meal. 4. Canned chicken. When everything around a family is shifting, a meal that still tastes familiar can do something that goes beyond nutrition. It can make a stressful day feel slightly more manageable. That quiet function is where canned chicken earns its place. It provides complete protein, goes directly from the can into a dish without thawing, and fits into meals the family already knows how to make and already wants to eat. Mixed with mayonnaise and simple seasoning, it becomes chicken salad. Wrapped in a tortilla with beans and cheese, it becomes a taco or quesadilla without much effort. Added to pasta, folded into rice, combined with vegetables, or layered into a casserole, even a small can adds enough protein to turn a basic dish into a proper meal. Its neutral flavor is one of its most practical qualities. Young children, picky eaters, and people who are put off by the stronger taste of canned fish will usually accept it without complaint. It does not taste exactly like freshly cooked chicken, but when the freezer is no longer reliable or buying fresh meat is not practical, it helps ordinary ingredients look and feel like a normal dinner rather than an emergency substitute. Rice and beans will keep a family fed. A can of chicken can help turn that into a dinner everyone at the table still recognizes. 3. Canned sardines. They photograph poorly. The smell hits the room the moment the lid comes off, and a large portion of the population has already decided they do not like sardines before they have ever seriously tried them. Set all of that aside for a moment and look at what is actually inside the can. Sardines provide complete protein, omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin D, vitamin B12, selenium, and if the soft bones are eaten, a meaningful amount of calcium as well. Very few compact, shelf-stable foods deliver that full a nutritional profile in a single small can. They can be eaten directly or served alongside toast, rice, or pasta. Sardines packed in oil provide additional fat and calories, and that oil can be used in the meal rather than automatically discarded. For people new to them, starting with varieties packed in tomato sauce or mustard makes the adjustment easier. A little leaven, a pinch of pepper, or a spoonful of hot sauce helps balance the stronger flavor. Sardines are not the right choice for every person or every meal, but their appearance and their smells should not be allowed to obscure how much nutritional value they actually deliver. People who have navigated genuinely difficult circumstances often understand that reliable food is not always the most appealing. When fresh protein is expensive and the kitchen is not functioning normally, that small overlooked can continues doing exactly what it was put there to do. 2. Canned chili. It is 7 in the evening. Work consumed the entire day. The news did not help. There is food in the pantry, ingredients that could technically become dinner, but no one has the energy left to actually start cooking. That is exactly when canned chili earns the value it rarely gets credit for. Unlike an ingredient that still needs several more steps before it becomes a meal, chili has already been assembled. It contains protein, beans, tomatoes, fat, fiber, and seasoning all in one can. Open it and heat it, and it is done. When the stove is unavailable, many varieties can still be eaten at room temperature if necessary.
Soup is useful when someone is sick and does not feel like eating. It works when a caregiver has been on their feet all day and has nothing left. It works at the end of a month when the budget is nearly gone and the energy to cook elaborate meals disappeared before the money did. Young children and older adults often accept a warm bowl of soup more readily than dry or heavy food that requires more effort to chew and swallow. When more servings are needed, a handful of rice, a bit of pasta, or a few canned vegetables can stretch one can further without much additional effort. But the greatest value of soup is not in how far it can stretch. It is in the fact that it remains achievable when the person who needs to eat it no longer has the energy to complete more than 2 or 3 steps. The warmth of soup carries something beyond its ingredients. It brings back a feeling of being cared for. A hot bowl on a hard day does not just quiet hunger. It makes the day feel slightly less impossible than it did a moment before. A pantry full of ingredients is only useful when someone has the energy to work through them. A can of soup only asks you to open the lid, and that is when the price on the label stops having anything to do with the value of what is inside. Now go back to that canned food aisle. Everything is still neatly arranged, prices are still posted clearly, there are no crowds, no empty spaces where these products used to be. But the value of food is not decided at the point of purchase. It is decided on the night no one has the energy to cook, on the morning after the refrigerator stopped working, on the week when fresh meat moved past what remains of the budget. A solid pantry does not need to be massive. It needs enough protein, vegetables, fruit, fat, and a few ready-to-eat options to keep meals manageable when circumstances stop cooperating. Building one is not about fear, it is about understanding what your family actually eats, buying a reasonable amount extra, and rotating through it consistently. Of these 12 items, which one is your family currently missing? Drop it in the comments below, and if this was useful, please give it a like and share it with someone who would find it helpful. This is my channel,